I paid off my parents' mortgage as a surprise for their anniversary. Then got a group text. We're giving your room to John's girlfriend. Unlike you, she actually contributes to this family. My mom added, don't make it awkward. Just be grateful you were ever included. I just responded, noted. That night, I made 2 calls. They discovered the house was no longer theirs. I, 29 had just finished the biggest surprise of my life, and it was about to become the biggest mistake I'd ever made. 3 weeks before my parents' 30th anniversary, I quietly paid off their remaining $180,000 mortgage. I'd been saving for years, working 70-hour weeks at my consulting firm, living in a tiny apartment while they lived in the 4-bedroom house I grew up in. The plan was simple: surprise them on their anniversary, watch mom cry happy tears, and finally feel like I'd given back to the people who raised me. I never told them about the payment. I wanted it to be perfect. The mortgage company confirmed everything was handled, and I even arranged for the deed papers to be delivered on their anniversary morning. I was driving to their house that Saturday with flowers and champagne when my phone buzzed with a group text. The message was from John, my younger brother. It included Mom, Dad, and me in the group chat. The text hit me like a sledgehammer. Hey everyone, Sarah's moving in next weekend. She's getting the upstairs room since it's bigger and she actually helps around here. Before I could process that fully, another message popped up from Mom. We're giving your room to John's girlfriend. Unlike you, she actually contributes to this family. My hands started shaking as I pulled over to the side of the road. 29 years old, and I was reading a text that dismissed me like some deadbeat relative. Sarah was John's girlfriend of 8 months. She worked part-time at a coffee shop and spent most of her time at their house anyway, apparently helping with yard work and cooking dinner. Dad chimed in next. Son, you barely visit anymore, and when you do, you just eat our food and leave. Sarah's been more family to us in 8 months than you've been in years. The final blow came from Mom again. Don't make it awkward when you come by. Just be grateful you were ever included in this family. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, reading and rereading those messages. The mortgage payment confirmation was still in my email. The champagne was getting warm in my passenger seat. Everything I thought I knew about my family crumbled in the span of 3 text messages. I typed back one word. Noted. That night, I made 2 calls. The first call was to Rodriguez, a real estate attorney I'd worked with on several client deals. I explained the situation, and he walked me through the process. Since I had paid off the mortgage, the house was technically mine until I transferred the deed to my parents. I'd planned to do that the next morning as part of the surprise. Rodriguez confirmed that I could legally take possession of the property and gave me the number of a property management company that handled emergency evictions. The second call was to Peterson Property Management. They specialized in rapid tenant turnover for investment properties. I explained that I needed to reclaim my house from squatters who had been living there without a lease. Technically true, since I now own the property and had never signed any rental agreement with them. Peterson said they could have an eviction notice posted by Monday morning and the property cleared by the following weekend if the occupants didn't contest it. I spent Sunday drafting a letter to my parents. I kept it simple and factual. I explained that I had purchased their house by paying off the mortgage as an anniversary gift. Since they had made it clear that I wasn't considered family and wasn't welcome, I was reclaiming the property for my own use. I gave them 30 days to find alternative housing, which was more than the legal requirement. Monday morning came fast. I drove to the house early and watched from down the street as Peterson's team posted the eviction notice. The bright yellow paper looked surreal against the green door of my childhood home. I could see Dad's silhouette in the kitchen window, probably drinking his morning coffee and reading the news on his tablet like he did every day. My phone exploded around 8:30 a.m. John called first, screaming about how I couldn't just kick them out of their own house. I let it go to voicemail. Then Mom called, then Dad, then John again. I ignored them all and went to work. That evening, I finally listened to the voicemails. John's messages escalated from confused to angry to panicked. Mom's voice cracked as she asked me to call her back and explain what was happening. Dad's single message was just him asking if this was some kind of mistake. The group text thread lit up too. John demanded to know what I thought I was doing. Mom asked if I had lost my mind. Dad wanted to know if I was having some kind of mental breakdown. I responded to the group chat. You said Sarah contributes more to this family than I do. She's welcome to contribute toward your new rent somewhere else. I'm moving into my house next month. The next few days were intense. My parents hired a lawyer who quickly discovered that everything I'd done was legal. I owned the house free and clear. They had no lease agreement with me. The eviction was valid. John showed up at my apartment Wednesday night. He pounded on my door for 20 minutes, alternating between apologies and threats. He said he'd make me pay for this, that I was destroying the family over a misunderstanding. He begged me to reconsider, saying Mom hadn't stopped crying since Monday. I didn't answer the door. By Friday, they'd hired a moving truck. I drove by the house that evening and saw boxes stacked on the front lawn. Dad was loading furniture while Mom supervised from the porch steps. She looked older than I remembered, more fragile. John and Sarah were carrying out what looked like bedroom furniture. I felt a twist in my stomach watching them pack up their lives, but I remembered that group text. I remembered being told I should be grateful to have ever been included in their family. The feeling passed. Update 1. 2 weeks later, they were gone. I had the locks changed and hired a cleaning crew to prepare the house. Walking through the empty rooms felt surreal. My childhood bedroom still had the same blue paint I'd picked out in middle school. The kitchen still smelled faintly like Mom's Sunday morning pancakes. I moved in the following weekend. It was strange sleeping in the master bedroom where my parents had slept for nearly 20 years. I kept expecting to hear Dad's alarm clock at 6 a.m. or smell Mom's coffee brewing downstairs. John tried calling me a few more times over the next month. He left voicemails saying they'd found an apartment across town, that Mom was having trouble adjusting, that Dad's blood pressure medication had been increased. He said they wanted to talk, to work things out as a family. I never called back. 3 months after the eviction, I ran into Dad at the grocery store. He was in the produce section, looking at apples with the same methodical attention he'd always given to selecting fruit. He was thinner than I remembered, and his hair had gotten grayer. He approached me carefully, like I might bolt if he moved too fast. He asked how I was doing, if I was settled into the house. I told him I was fine. He mentioned that Mom's arthritis was acting up in the new apartment, something about the stairs being harder on her joints. He asked if we could sit down somewhere and talk. I told him I didn't see the point. He stood there for a moment, holding a bag of apples, then nodded and walked away. Update 2. 6 months after taking the house, I decided to renovate. I gutted the kitchen first, removing all the cabinets Mom had picked out in the late 90s. The wallpaper in the dining room came next, the same pattern that had been there since I was in high school. While tearing down drywall in the basement, I found a box of family photos that had been forgotten behind the old water heater. Pictures of birthday parties, Christmas mornings, family vacations. There was one photo of me at 8 years old, missing 2 front teeth, standing between Mom and Dad at some beach. We all looked genuinely happy. I almost threw the box away, but instead, I put it in my closet upstairs. Around this time, I heard through mutual friends that my parents were struggling with their new living situation. The apartment was smaller and more expensive than they'd anticipated. Dad had taken a part-time job at a hardware store to help cover the increased costs. Mom had started selling crafts at a local farmer's market. John had moved in with Sarah at her place, unable to afford his own apartment after contributing to their parents' rent. Apparently, the financial strain was causing problems between him and Sarah. I felt a brief moment of satisfaction hearing about their difficulties, followed immediately by guilt. These were the people who had raised me, who had driven me to soccer practice and helped with homework and celebrated my college graduation. But then I remembered that group text, and the satisfaction returned. Update 3. A year after the eviction, John showed up at my front door again. This time, he looked different. Tired. Defeated. He asked if we could talk, man to man, without all the anger and accusations. I let him in. He sat on my new leather couch, the one I'd bought to replace their old fabric sectional, and told me everything was falling apart. Sarah had left him 2 months earlier. She said the family drama was too much stress, and she couldn't handle dating someone whose brother had made his parents homeless. John was living alone in a studio apartment and working 2 jobs to help support Mom and Dad. He said Mom had developed anxiety since the move. She barely slept and had started having panic attacks. Dad's health was declining, and the stress of their new financial situation wasn't helping. They'd had to downsize from a 2-bedroom apartment to a 1-bedroom to save money. John looked me in the eyes and asked what it would take for me to give them back the house. He said they were sorry, that the group text had been thoughtless and cruel. He offered to get everyone together to apologize properly. I told him the house wasn't for sale. He left without another word. 2 weeks later, I received a handwritten letter from Mom. Her handwriting was shakier than I remembered. She wrote about how sorry she was for the things she'd said in that text message. She explained that she'd been frustrated with my distance from the family, my infrequent visits, my apparent focus on work over relationships. She said she'd lashed out without thinking about how her words would affect me. She wrote about missing the house, about how hard it was to live in such a small space after 30 years in a 4-bedroom home. She mentioned that Dad had fallen last month because he wasn't used to the apartment's layout in the dark. She asked if there was any way we could work something out, some arrangement where they could come home. At the bottom of the letter, she wrote, "I know I said you should be grateful to be included in this family. The truth is, we should be grateful you ever wanted to be our son." I read the letter 3 times, then put it in the box with the old photos. Final update. 18 months after taking the house, I received a call from John. Dad had had a heart attack. He was in intensive care at the hospital across town. John's voice was hollow as he gave me the details. Mom was with Dad, and the doctors weren't sure if he was going to make it. I hung up the phone and sat in the kitchen where Dad used to read his morning paper. The house felt enormous and empty around me. I drove to the hospital that night. I found Mom in the waiting room, looking smaller than ever in a chair that seemed to swallow her whole. She looked up when she saw me, and her eyes filled with tears. She didn't say anything, just reached for my hand. I sat with her until the doctor came out to tell us Dad was stable but would need surgery in the morning. John arrived an hour later with coffee and sandwiches that nobody wanted to eat. We sat in uncomfortable silence, 3 family members who had become strangers. Dad survived the surgery, but his recovery was slow. I visited him every day for a week, watching him sleep in that hospital bed surrounded by machines. On the 7th day, he woke up while I was sitting there. He looked at me for a long moment, then told me he was proud of what I'd accomplished in my career. He said he'd never really understood how hard I'd worked or how successful I'd become. He admitted that he and Mom had taken my financial stability for granted and had assumed I'd always be fine, no matter how they treated me. He asked if I thought we could ever be a family again. I told him I didn't know. Dad came home to their apartment after 3 weeks in the hospital. I helped John move him up the narrow stairs, and I could see how difficult it was for Dad to navigate the small space with his limited mobility. The apartment felt cramped and depressing after the open layout of the house. That night, I called Rodriguez and asked about the legal process for transferring property ownership. He walked me through the options and mentioned that I could structure it as a life estate, where they could live in the house until they died, at which point ownership would revert to me. I thought about it for 2 weeks. On a rainy Thursday evening, I drove to their apartment with a folder of legal documents. Mom answered the door, surprised to see me. I asked if we could all sit down together. I told them I had paid off the mortgage as an anniversary gift 18 months ago. I explained how devastating their group text had been, how completely it had changed my understanding of my place in the family. I said I'd acted out of hurt and anger, and while I didn't regret protecting myself, I regretted how far I'd let it go. I set the folder on their small kitchen table and told them they could move back into the house under a life estate agreement. They would live there rent-free for the rest of their lives, but they would never own the property again. I would handle all maintenance and repairs, and they would be responsible for utilities and basic upkeep. Dad started crying. I'd never seen him cry before, not even at his own father's funeral. Mom asked if this meant I forgave them. I told her I was working on it, but this wasn't about forgiveness. This was about doing the right thing for people who had raised me, even if they'd hurt me more than I thought possible. John asked what he could do to make things right between us. I told him he could start by never speaking to me the way he had in that group text ever again. They moved back into the house a month later. I kept my apartment across town. We have dinner together once a week now, usually on Sundays. The conversations are still awkward sometimes, but we're trying. Dad's health has improved since returning to familiar surroundings. Mom seems less anxious now that she's back in her own space. John visits every weekend and has been more respectful in how he talks to me. I still have that group text saved in my phone. Sometimes I read it when I need to remember why boundaries matter. Sometimes I read Mom's letter when I need to remember that people can change. The house is still mine legally, and I make sure they never forget that. It's not forgiveness, exactly, but it's something. Maybe it's enough.